Okay, so hello everyone, and thank you very much for coming. It's great seeing you again, and I hope you're all doing well. Let me at the very beginning apologize for some technical issues. Namely, there were some problems with starting the live stream today, so unfortunately we were unable to stream this recording onto the YouTube platform. We hope that we might get it to work during the presentation and or discussion. But in case this doesn't pan out, we apologize and we will just upload the video to YouTube so that it can be watched later on. Anyway, after 3 magnificent previous talks by Lou Kaufman, Evan Thompson, and Tom Fruse, we're heading into another exciting installment of Ouroboros Seminar dedicated to the exploration of life and work of Francisco Varela, whom all of you here know very well. My name is Sebastjan Vörös. I'm assistant professor at the Faculty of Arts, and I am the moderator of these sessions. So let me at the very beginning again mention, just in case some people might be joining or watching this who haven't yet taken part in this series, a few short points about the series itself. So the Ouroboros Seminar this year is organized jointly by the research group in the making Metanoia, Mind and Life Europe, and Faculty of Arts, University of Ljubljana. The seminar is part of a broader initiative and a beautiful initiative by Mind and Life Europe, which centers around 2 special anniversaries, namely the 20th the 20th anniversary of Francisco's passing in 2001 and the 30th anniversary of the publication of The Embodied Mind. Now, before we continue, I would kindly ask Gabor if he would be willing to say a few words about the upcoming projects in the context of this particular initiative.
Thank you, Sebastian. I also welcome everyone in the session, in the seminar, and also who will follow us on YouTube or will watch this recording. This is especially an important year for us, as Sebastian mentioned, at Mind and Life Europe. We are paying tribute to Francisco Varela's work, as Sebastian mentioned, and there will be 2 key events coming up this May. One is an International Varela symposium co-organized with Upaya Institute and Zen Center, an association of mindfulness in France, and Niracara in Spain, offering a 3-day program with the title An Exploration of Uncertainty and Emergence in Self and Society, that will bring together a remarkable faculty to explore cutting-edge areas of science, philosophy, and contemplative practices, including Roshi Joan Halifax, Richard Davidson, Evan Thompson, who is here with us today, Amy Cohen Varela, who is also here with us today, Adam Frank, Sensaya Kasniak, John Dunn, and Elena Antonova and Haneda Yeager. So we are really looking forward to this event, and you can find all the information on our Mind and Life Europe website about the program. The other event that we are putting an especially high emphasis on is a tribute day to Francisco on May 20th. The title of the event is Francisco Varela, a Thinker for Our Time, and the organizer of this event, cooperation partner, is the Ouroboros Seminars. This will be a tribute day. Originally, the event was planned to take place between 19th to 25th of May, but because of the pandemic, the organizers cannot and could not organize an in-person event this year. So we decided to postpone the event for next year, August 2022. And we organize an online tribute day this year with significant contributors. Again, you will hear about the program and every detail, how to join through our communication on our website and social media. So we all welcome you there, and we'll see you there in a couple of weeks' time. And thank you for joining us and being part of this especially important month of 2021, commemorating Francisco and his friends. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gabor, for this marvelous update. Very interesting event. Now going back to the seminar, again, a few short words about the structure of the seminar. So we will have a 20 to 40 minute long presentation on a selected paper. And after that, we will have a 60 to 90 minute discussion. As I already mentioned, I will be moderating the discussion, and I would kindly ask you to post all your questions into the chat box. You can post them in the public chat box. If this goes live during the presentation or discussion, people joining us at YouTube are also more than welcome to post their questions there. I would kindly ask you to try to structure your questions so that they are short, concise, comprehensive, and to the point, at least as much as that is possible. And I would also like to mention to the younger scholars that they are more than welcome to contribute and pose their questions. Lastly, I would like to kindly remind you about our Discord channel. So an online platform where our discussions can be continued after the event. And I would like also to thank all of those who have already joined the Discord channel. Especially big shout out goes to John Protevi for many extremely useful hints, notes, materials on the relation between Francisco Varela's work and Deleuze philosophy. Now, all the information about how to join the Discord channel is available at the Metanoia and Mind and Life Europe websites. We would be very happy if you could join us there. Okay, so moving on to today's presentation. So today we have as the presenter with us, Adrian Palacios. Adrian is interested in sensory ecology and understanding how the design and function of animals' visual system responds to the physics of the light environment in which they live. Animals use light signals to guide their behaviors, including sexual selection, individual recognition, and camouflage. We're using Adrian and his team is using cellular electrophysiology and biochemical methods to assess the functional characteristics of the visual system and computational tools to understand neuronal coding mechanisms. Moreover, Adrian and his colleagues work on the neurobiology of learning and memory using behavior, biochemistry, and synaptic plasticity to address neurodegeneration's etiology during aging. Another area of Adrian's interest is complexity science, and he coordinates several multidisciplinary activities at the Complex System Institute in Valparaiso, Chile. Now, today's paper so there was a bit of a change in the original structure of the seminars, namely, we wanted to present another paper, but then Evan correctly, in my view, suggested this particular paper, which is of a bit later date, but I think is general with regards to the scope of scope which it covers. So the paper is called Ways of Coloring, Comparative Color Vision as a case study for cognitive science. And I would just kindly ask Adrian if he could do a short presentation of the paper and maybe also provide a bit of a context about how he and Francisco met and how they collaborated.
Okay. Let's share my presentation. Okay, I don't know if you see that. Okay, it's okay? I mean, it's, yeah. Okay, first of all, I very appreciate the invitation and the organizer of Sebastjan, Gabor, and Amy, and maybe others, for this opportunity just for me to back in history. I mean, to the many years ago when I was with Francisco Varela during a couple of years in my education period that was for my PhD. And today I would like to mention that when I arrived, I mean, when I first met Francisco, and was really in a very empty space in Jussieu, that the one that in the future turned to be his first labs in experimental biology, in neurobiology. I mean, that was a very amazing experience for me and people that arrived to this lab later on. I mean, 1 or 2 years after me. And he was just coming back from Chile and from Germany, from short stay in World Singer Lab. And he was decided to work in the neurobiology of vision and color vision, in particular in birds, because I mean, it was expected that this organism has more than 3 visual pigments, mainly, I mean, cones, that are the receptor for energy, from different energies in the wavelength domain. So he was expecting that working in this area, we could show that actually the birds and then other animals, then reptile, fishes, should show an hyper dimension, chromatic dimension, and a space of chroma that is higher dimension than the one that we experience like human. So this was the beginning of my working in a PhD work that was during 3 or 4 years that I stayed with him. And let's go to the next. And I just put this because it's an I'm gonna put this laser there. That was, I just recopilate some papers that was published by Francisco, and we see that vision, experimental working in the physiology or behavior of the visual system was started and finished by 1991. This was mostly the last period that Francisco was involved in experimental biology in the area of the visual system, you know, from his thesis in Harvard to the Jussieu 1991 and 1997. That was one paper that we worked together, but it was really something that an outcome very late. But we stopped there, and this was in the beginning. My thesis started in 1986 and finished by 2, 3, 4 years after that, and was in the same period that Evan Thompson was also working with Francisco in the other area of the paper that I would like to today introduce to this group, and because it has this philosophy side, also the neurobiological side, and Francisco that was just articulating both in terms of his own theory about the visual system, in action. So the paper, I'm gonna go a little bit faster maybe, because it's a long paper, because it's it's a target paper for behavioral and brain science, where you just put controversial ideas, and then there are people that discuss this idea, and then you need to reply to this, last discussion. So it's a long paper, and I would like just to show how the idea of the enaction is coming to some shape, just situated in itself in this area of color vision. So just I recall that color vision, that is the subject of this paper, is a very tiny windows in the electromagnetic radiation that allow us to enjoy and to experience colors. It's like an accident that from, energetical proposal, just is covered like 400 nanometers between blue UV and the red side, that is very, 400 nanometers, that is very short, but the experience is wonderful about colors. So just I want to do now a short brief of the whole paper, and that came from another contribution that we made a few years ago in another article, that is essentially is that I want to go fast, but this is way to colors. Yeah, a fundamental element with regard to vision is the assumption that the visual experience should be described in terms of one property assigned to an object. And this paper, way of coloring, distinguish between what they call computational objectivism and neurophysiological subjectivism. According to the former, it assumes that the function of color vision is the achievement of color constancy, defined as the recovery of the invariant surface spectral reflectance in an image and a sense. Moreover, a cognitive system perceives an object just in case it can create an internal image and representation reproducing some of that object's objective quality. This is the main thesis of the perceptual representationalism. By contrast, this is the opposite. Neurophysiology subjectivism oppose that premise. First, surface spectral reflectance is any of the many kinds of the stimuli that can give rise to color experience. Second, the property of color, for example, the uniqueness or binaries of the hue and hue opponency, that is the biology side of how you integrate wavelength or energy, cannot be found in property of the distal or proximal physical stimuli of color vision. And then is this alternative that this way of coloring is proposing that account for the enaction point of view that should be experientially an ecological account of the visual perception. And we need to incorporate both ecological aspect and also the internal experience of that color. And then is this comparative argument that take experiments for animal color vision in general, just to account the many elements that need to be taken in account to support the enactive proposal. So the paper is organized in several parts. One is an explanation in visual science and the ontology of color with sub-chapters that are here. And also then is the comparative argument with also some small chapters, overview, color space, and other animal, etc. And then finished by an enactive view of color vision, the synthesis of the first and the second part of the article. Let's just start with the argument that the paper starts. No? First is color vision in general, like an biological system, take in account of people that work in this area several levels to work on. I mean, there are level of analysis, that is the classical division that Weimar started with the level of like the computational level, algorithmic level, and implementation level in the side more of computational science. In terms of the biology, we have this level of organization. That means that you just start to work in biology, you want to find molecules, synapses, neuron, network, maps, system, and the whole neural system and behavior when you work on this area. And then you have also level of operation. That means that each of these level of organization also have an operation in terms of the circuit, neural network, how they communicate synapses between them, how the protein work, they contact each other, etc. So it's depending on your field, you want to take all of this area, particular vision, with one of these assumptions. I mean, your level of organization, the level of operation, and if you like or not, if you are more in the level of analysis, like computational neuroscience, you also want to decide you work more in algorithmic, like is equivalent to psychophysics, neurophysiology, or implementation, where you are these algorithms are implemented. Is the neuroanatomy or the neurophysiology that you want to take in consideration. And then one of the important part of the paper is taking that to understand or to work in color vision, you need to create an space, and color space where you plot, you map all of your observation. And that's create whatever you, I mean, this point to point between your experience like chroma or hue or saturation and the map that's gonna, I mean, it's gonna integrate this reference. And that is what in the paper is called phenomenal structure of the color space. And that is the point of view more of your psychophysical result. I mean, you ask people how they compare, I mean, how they are receiving two wavelengths difference. If they are different, they are close, or they are very, I mean, the same. So this map that you can ask people or animal, for instance, just can be plot to this space of color that, for instance, that does not have the physiology. For instance, it's just the psychophysics that is just taking account of this map. And then you have this nice, I mean, saturation, hue, and brightness model of your visual system. So then, when you go from this color space that is more phenomenal to the equivalent or to the process that your brain or your retina wanna produce, then you need to take other kind of the measure. Say, okay, I wanna measure that, I wanna go to the biology, I wanna put some electrode, some biochemistry measure, or whatever is your method to just to quantify the effect of this stimuli in your internal body. And then it's a complete new database in terms of you're going to realize that there are visual pigments that absorb light and create a biochemistry signal that's going to be received by neurons, and they're going to go to another synapses, to another neuron, and then it's going to write to the brain, to some part of the brain. And when you start to doing that, also you realize that your visual system is organized in opposite, I mean, with the opposite response. That means that you are recorded from a neuron, one couple of neurons. You realize that sometimes for green, you're going to have treatment, you're going to have a depolarization, you're going to have more response, more spike. And from another one, like red or yellow, you will have less response. And then when you do that, I mean, in the length of the wavelength spectrum, you realize that you have like channels. They are the channels that goes from excitation to inhibition along the spectrum. And then is what is called the channel, antagonism channel, that take in account the way that your visual system is going to transform the signal that comes from the outside world in something that is physiological, has some physiological meaning for your brain. I mean, this is what you observe. It's not invent. I mean, I'm not creating ideas. I mean, this is what happens when you measure that. So then you have your phenomenal space, and then you combine with the physiological result. So this both start to create some binding, you know, about these two kind of the result. And the paper then goes to link, you know, between this color space that need to have some properties, some description, multi-level. From the you need to have a receptor space. Lightness is an indicator space. Lightness is a global computation that people working in this area can calculate. I mean, physiological channel, what we have just talked about, psychophysical channel. This is when you ask people to make and to give a response from a particular stimulus that change in hue, saturation, or intensity. And this phenomenal space is what this appear for you. I mean, is an very saturated, have a lot of brightness, etc. And the paper then start to bind in these two areas of research in one. In one is like a bridge, you know, you're creating it within these two different fields of research. And say the paper say that has a matter of general principle. However, it is clear that the phenomenal structure of color co-varies with the structure of the perceiver. That means that your physiology, your visual system has some particular elements that varies if you are a bird, if you are a reptile, if you are a human, or if you are a fish. You know, you have your own design to respond or to the physical, I mean, stimuli in wavelength domain. And then the paper also goes to this area that I'm going to go very fast here, is computational point of view. I mean, computational color vision, and that essentially define that there are several levels that people in that time, we are talking about many years ago, they were considered to include in their own model to use computational neuroscience or to color vision, just to create something that could be similar to, or the idea of the similar that they were having when they study vision, you know, this was very similar to human, etc. So they are low dimension, that is just, I mean, is the sensor that catch photon essentially. Then it's global computation, just to have a relevance of this global illumination, like lightness or constancy, and a special segmentation in how, from the point of view of the computational in neuroscience, in color vision, you want to segment your spatial scene, you know, how you want to divide what the camera is receiving, you know, if that is going to be the border of an object, etc., etc. So these three levels were like important for this area. And the paper also mentioned that were like some current ontologies, in the sense that were some problems, you know. That's why you need another positional point of view about how the visual, how colors are being processed in biological and experiential domain. And that was that the color constancy in human is approximately, is not perfect. So that is something that, from the point of view of the people working in computational side, they were not able really to give some right answer to that. I mean, why is it if human is, the color constancy is not working perfectly like the one that you guys can create with your own computer? I mean, you create your algorithm and you have you recover and perfect constancy. So humans were not working similar to the what was expected, the point of view of computational science. You know? So this, and for the side of the philosophy, this I just read there. I mean, ontology is more the specialty of philosopher, but they don't agree either. In fact, the two positions just was outlined. I mean, outlined with their respective link to computational vision and neurophysiology. We have Hilbert and Martin defend objectivism largely on the basis of computational color vision. So they take, I mean, more in this side of the evidence to create their own solution to the problem of color vision. And Harding defends subjectivism largely on the basis of neurophysiology and psychophysics in terms of the opponent process theory. So one side is computational objectivism, and then neurophysiology with this opponent theory, and that also have divided philosophers. Yeah. So then now we're going to go to this comparative argument to follow the argument of the paper. And essentially this, there are several arguments that need to be mentioned. Animal whose neural apparatus have they are common. I mean, they are similar in terms of in the periphery, like for receptor or synapses that you can find in the retina, for instance. They are very similar between fishes, bird, primate, maybe a little bit different in terms of the definition in insect, but they are essentially, they do the same things. Yeah, and they possess color vision, but they live in very diverse environment context. And also this variation imply different phenomenal color space. That means when you plot the evidence that you have from psychophysics, from neurophysiology, or etc., the shape of this color space look different. We go back to this one. And then is the necessity, yeah, to conciliate in a new theory about the ontology of the color vision, the experientialist and ecological need to be both. You need to take in account the ecology, and you need to take in account your experience of the color. And this, when this comparative argument is going to help us to go through this area. And then go to the first argument, the color space in other animal. And this is a nice picture that I take from Tom Baden, that actually what is plotting here is that the different vertebrates there, I mean, and you see that is the number of photoreceptor, I mean, the sensor is with some special tuning to some wavelengths are present in the retina of this animal. And what we can see is that start for mammals is an reduced numbers. I mean, most of the mammals are dichromat, and some trichromat that is really, I mean, an accident in the evolution. I mean, we are trichromat, but very, I mean, with a not very long history. But bird, reptile, and amphibian have four different types of the photoreceptor, and that create, I mean, that your color space in terms of the phenomenal space is going to be different, because when you want to plot this, you're going to find that they are not have the same shape of this space. This is very important. And then this is when I arrived to the lab, because this was the idea of Francisco, that why we don't work in bird that has more pigment apparently that other animal. So I started doing color mixing, that is a methodology just to mix color, in the sense that you can plot your color space in terms of the one, how close you are from one wavelength to the other one, just putting one in the side of the other, and ask the subject if there are differences between this mixing, or they are similar. And then you can start to plot. You plot and design, I mean, very slowly, the shape of this color space. And we have used a bird. I mean, it's like was pigeon. There are a lot of pigeon in Paris, and essentially we're in the roof of Jussieu. So we started working with pigeon and training this animal just to select if something was similar or different depending on the wavelength to be presented in a small window where the animal should just to peck there to have a reinforcement. And then we start to map this space that were not known at the time, but we start to doing this in Paris. So this is the kind of experiment that we just obtained, just the mixing of, for example, 590 nanometers, and then it was a mix of 508 and 640, and then we just mix it like you cold and hot water. I mean, you say, okay, just in the 60 and 40% of one and the other, you have something that the animal behavioral, they don't distinguish between some against some monochromatic light. So this is the kind of experiment that you need to do just to start to map this, I mean, color space. And pigeons and birds and fishes has some little problem there. I mean, that is not a problem, but they have, the photoreceptor have some oil dropped here that are filtered, so they create, when they are present, some more extra kind of the pigments, that are present. So the visual pigments, they are more complex that are in animal like human, because we don't have this oil dropped. But this is not a problem. We start to playing with that with some model, and just to carry on. Yeah, and this is what I say before. And now the subject of the diversity of color also have some interestingly outcome. For example, here we show here that this is the visual pigment that are present in human, and then this is in insect and also in bird. And what we can see that essentially this insect has 3 visual pigment, and this bird has 4. So the colors and that they can distinguish in nature are quite different from the human point of view. That's what we see here. I mean, this UV reflection, this is our patterns of light that are not visible to humans. So this visual pigment creates something that is new in terms of the areas that are present in some objects that are important for animal, that human cannot see it because we lack of this UV photoreceptor. So this is kind of the new colors, that new experience with color that human cannot have. So this is one of the arguments of this comparative studies, And this new kind of the hue, they are very important because here is a development that has been done, you know, when you have more than 3 visual pigment, that is the case of sensor, that is the case on human, and you go to 4 or 5 present, then you start to have a new mixture of color that create unique color. That's in human, you can create binary combination. That means, for example, when you mix red and green, this is very similar to yellow. You know, this is a binary combination that create a new sensation that is yellow, and yellow can be distinct, is different, you know, in that red and green in itself. But when you have more, you have 4 visual pigment, then is something turn up to be ternary combination. I mean, you can mix 3 different one to create new sensations. So you start to having a complexity in your possibility to create new kind of the hue that are depending of the, I mean, the number of these sensors that are present in your retina. You know, that is very important for whatever is come, because when you start now to play around this, you create that you cannot represent your space of chroma in animal that has more than 3 visual pigment, for instance 4, then you need to have a tetrahedron. And this tetrahedron now is a volume that is to able to shape, you know, I mean, the coordinates of your colors, different colors that you can discriminate. But when you make these projections, I mean, in a tetrahedron, what happened that is different to the human color space that is trichromatic, that you have more sources of purple, that they are non-spectral colors that appear. I mean, that start to show up, you know. And this is when we left. I mean, I left the lab of Francisco after my thesis. Is something that was not new. I mean, it was a little geometrical projection of this color space, but was not any evidence that this new non-spectral, you know, this projected non-spectral axis were really having an equivalent for your behavior. I mean, no one knows. I mean, you know, no one was testing that at that moment. It was some ideas, some little evidence, but nothing else. And then when I just very fast here, and years ago, we started working with Hummingbird in Chile, and we realized that, well, they also have 4 pigment in their retina, that when you go to the field and you measure flowers that they visit, then you can plot their spectral, I mean, reflectances from this from flower that they visit. That there are some flower that have 2 peaks, the 2 maximum, you know, and one is in the close to the ultraviolet or blue, but have another peak also in the other side of the spectrum. They're like bimodals, you know. And this bimodal, when you just plotted now this maximum in your color space, you realize that they are more close to these non-spectral colors, you know, but we were not measured that ourselves because we just project reflectances in this color space, but we were not doing behavior. And I mean, 2 years ago, 1 year ago, sorry, was a very nice paper that came out by Mary Caswell in Princeton. What she has done the experiment that everyone was waiting, I mean, in the field about non-spectral colors, I mean, and they show very clearly with really in the field, she was in the field with a couple of years working there with lead that they mix it, and this mixing color are associated with the glucose, I mean, with the sugar, so the animal can go or not go depending on their discrimination. And then this group show that actually this axis, the projected axis when you are a tetrachromat animal has a behavioral meaning. That means they are colors that we human cannot see it, but they can use it like an colors for them. I mean, they can use for whatever they need to do. I mean, these are source to create new colors, and this was very inspiring paper because I mean they close the loop, about this projection of tetrahedron between something that became more reality than before. And they had done the same that I showed before. I mean, also goes measure some flower visit by this animal, and they show these two peaks here too. There's a many flower there, and when you plot it in the tetrahedron, also they turn to be in this axis that of non-spectral colors. And this is the same. I'm gonna go. And also, it's another nice example of tetrachromaticity. This is a painter that is genetically has one extra protein coding for an opsin that, I mean, that shape and an extra cone receptor. And when she paint, actually she mentioned that they use new way of painting. I mean, because she see colors that are different. I mean, that we are not aware of, but this is one of the first painters that actually is come and case of the study, because I mean, it's a real tetrachromatic human in the point of view of the color vision. So this is kind of the picture that they made. I mean, the right is what she was painting, and the left was what she really see it there. And then I go fast to the last one of the last argument is this comparative argument that is now after the paper goes to many pages, just putting some argument that objectivism or subjectivism in alone in itself cannot be the real solution. You need to have really, I mean, another way to put this in terms of your theory about color vision. And then is some rejection here, revisited computational objectivism. And here in the paper we mentioned two arguments. I mean, this is the following. I mean, is that the location in some color space that is must be specified in terms of the hue, saturation, and brightness, and that cannot be done in terms of the surface spectral reflectance. In the term of you cannot plot, the spectral reflectance in a color space in the sense that it has many points. I mean, they are not something one subject can discriminate one spectral reflectance against another and just plot one. I mean, this you cannot do it. That, I mean, it's not possible. And this here are the arguments for this external irreducibility. That's something to be chromatic. It must be unhue. You need to have a kind of the etiquette. I mean, the category color. For something to be unhue, it must be either unique or binary or ternary in the case that you have more receptor than the three, and etc. And cannot be organisms independent, therefore cannot be reducible to identify with such organisms independent with external property. I mean, you need to have also this internal reality that comes with. And it's another also argument, the point of view of the perceiver relativity, that color vision contribute to the task of segmenting the visual scene into region of this or distinct surface of an object. Color vision varies considerable through the animal world. Many of what we have mentioned, that you need to take in account the ecology, where the subject is interacting just to have a real sense of the meaning of the color. So this is the point of view of the computational objectivism. The point of view of the neurophysiology side also is that this kind of phenomena indicate that a purely neural explanation for color vision is not incomplete. I mean, you cannot just take the brain and just measure some neural network that inside, and that doesn't gonna give you, for all of the people, I mean, for all of the subjects, one solution. I mean, you cannot just go to do this level of organization that we have talked in the beginning and just try to understand how your network works. This is gonna be in itself, it's not gonna be the solution alone. You know, you need to mix this with another consideration that came to what the animal is doing also in nature. And then there are several examples that is given in the paper, like this co-evolution between flowers and insects is one of the examples that you cannot understand both without the other. I mean, you need the point of view of the evolution of your visual system. If you are an insect, you need to take care also of the flower that you are visiting, and the flower need to also to take consideration of the insect visiting you. No, this is co-evolution is something that need to be incorporated in the understanding of the neurophysiology of color vision. And go fast in that, because this and this is so like the end of the paper, like it put some enactive positional argument, and this take in account that is very important to take in consideration what the Levins and Lewontin has also advanced in the past in terms of how organisms construct their environment in terms of the organisms and the relations of organisms that transform their own place where they live and vice versa. So this is something that the enactive program take in account the observation of Lewin and Lewontin. And also the approach that the enactive approach also is taken in consideration. This is important to say, that is kind of what Marx or Gibson were working in terms of the ecological context of their own research, like Gibson, for instance, is something that cannot be only take in account the ecological aspect. I mean, you need to also to take in account the organisms that are visiting, that living, that are using this ecological I mean, a scenario to create their own behavior. So this is something that needs to be taken account. You need to mix, I mean, you need to take ecology and people working in the area, and to put together also the evidence that how the behavior is also, I mean, acting in this particular scenario, and vice versa in terms of the co-determination. Yeah? And the approach of enactive the theory need to take in account this in the term of your brain, the self-organizing property of the neural network, has the proper substrate of animal activity, and treating the environment not simply has the ecological setting for animal activity, but also has something determined by that very activity. You need to act, you need to move, you need to be inside of this loop, just to, I mean, have the sense of I mean, live and the experience of the color. Yeah. And
Adrian, I'm sorry to interrupt, but could we slowly maybe kind of wrap things up because
Sure.
we're way past the 40 minutes, 45
Sorry,
minutes.
sorry.
So no, it's not an issue. Just, you know, in say 5 minutes, if you could maybe just kind
Okay.
of sketch the final part of the argument so we can move on to the discussion
Sure.
as well. Thank
Okay,
you very much, Adrian.
Not a problem. Well, this is on this open discussion. So I want to just grab this like that, in the sense that this is the end of this part of the paper that was more like putting together a framework with the comparative approach, and that's with some some question that how the relevant color vision mechanism and the dimensionality of color space are related to the perceptual phenomena. This is like a program that is going on. I mean, this is something that what was proposed in this paper is not finished. Actually, has been many changes. I mean, in the last year that make things more close that were in this year. I mean, like computation science, that I think there are some now information and some methods that are included in computational science that take in account some of the criticisms that were in these years. So, and okay, I think this is the something. Yes, and I think what I want to go very fast in this because I wanna maybe back if there are questions about some other issue that it will apply. Just to finish that, actually when we just put this together, and there today much more evidence that in itself, when you take the retina, the eye, and then the brain, and this incorporate action, motor action also, I mean, you are acting in the world. This is something that doesn't finish. I mean, everything is singular. I mean, the brain, your brain is singular, your eye is your bird, or one fish, or one insect, or one human that happen. And you can take this in account. You have genes, proteins, you have your neural network is shaped in some way that change all over the time. You are aging, you have or not have, I mean, you are healthy, or you have some diseases. Everything is need to be taken into account, because this is what you have to interact with this world to create whatever it is your experience of this sensory ability that you have, that is color. So maybe I just finish there, and then back to some other issue that maybe I have. Just keep there. Huh? I don't know.
Adrian, thank you so much for this lovely presentation. Lovely and very colorful as well, with all the nice diagrams and all the nice structures that were presented, which made some of the points way clearer now during the presentation. So we're now slowly heading into the Q&A or discussion period. And I would just like to say at the very beginning, well, first of all, we're still having problems with the YouTube. Unfortunately, this is not going to work, it would seem, because Zoom is having some internal problems. So unfortunately, no streaming today. That's one thing. Another thing is that I forgot to mention that today we are in a very unique position, actually, because we have not only one, but actually two authors of the particular paper that we were discussing here. So Evan, I mentioned Evan, but I forgot to mention that he is also one of the authors, which is marvelous, I think. And then the third thing is the study of color is extremely interesting. For most part, people just, you know, tend to overlook the uniqueness of colors and the secrets they hide, in a certain sense. We are so used to them that we kind of they're almost transparent to us. But almost all thinkers that have found issues with certain predominant paradigms in science and philosophy have to a greater or lesser degree, turn to color as one of the phenomenon which actually show why there might be an issue with these paradigms. So you find, for example, reflections on color in Goethe, in Whitehead, in Kurt Goldstein, in Merleau-Ponty, in Wittgenstein, and also in Varela. So I would maybe like to start off this Q&A session with a question that consists of two parts, okay? One part would relate directly with some of the things that you said towards the end of your presentation. So how has the scientific community in general responded to this approach that you've put forward in this paper? You said that it was an unfinished project. It was more or less an open-ended inquiries of sorts. So it was more like here's a potentially interesting paradigm. Let's see if we can flesh it out. So how has this developed later? And in relation to that, when one reads the paper and also the comments at the end of the paper, one thing that one notices is how difficult it actually is for people from different disciplines to talk about this seemingly simple phenomenon of color, because an ongoing refrain that one finds in these discussions is what actually is color? Where do you grab it? How do you approach it? What needs to be taken into account? And it often, when I was reading some of the comments, I even had the impression that people, that some of the commentaries were speaking past what you as authors of this paper were trying to put forward. So the question would be, what was the development later on? And the problem of interdisciplinary discussion about color in general, which was, by the way, one of the questions that was also asked personally by Fabian. So one question to two directions.
Okay, the question are for me or for the audience? For everyone? Because
they are primarily they're directed
okay.
to you, but then if somebody wants to chime in, they should just kind of give me some sort of a sign and I'll call them out and then they can join the discussion. That would be the best case scenario.
Okay, yeah. Okay, I think there are many answers. I think one of the, if I just taking back and then see what happened today in some area that I think Evan is especially is of the side of the philosophy, so he can say more about philosophy field. And I feeling that what the impact of maybe this wave of coloring paper has been more incorporated in computational science. I mean, now when you just look at robotics, artificial visual system, or the emergencies now of deep learning, then you have some idea that they are using some of these, not objectivism or representation alone. I mean, they are using the acting, the in action. In robotics is a field. I mean, people are working at. There are areas like active vision that they take in account. They take in account, I mean, your history, experience of you are acting in the world just to work in vision. I mean, just to move using vision for behavior. And then, yes, they use maybe some terminology that people don't like much because they need some like paths a priori that are like Bayesian I mean, algorithms and postulated that need to have some kind of the memory, what you have done, just to expectation about the future. So this is something that is there. The point of view of the neurophysiology, or I don't think it's a lot of more. I mean, it's very difficult to work in this because, I mean, you need to have behavior and physiology and the ecology to work in this program of an active program, because you need to have 3 of them. If not, doesn't make any sense. I cannot think in a simple experiment in isolated brain or isolated retinas to prove or not to prove what is the reality, because I turn to use what is very objective, that are photons, that are electrical response, single response, or multineural response, but are very simple. I mean, these are just a spike, 1 zeros. So this is some problem with the methodology that is in biology in terms of, I don't see the fMRI, I mean, the big machine that are taking the whole brain and the person is alive, I see more like people working in the area of animal comparative. And the paper of this group in Princeton is a very nice one, because it's something that was predicted many years ago. It was a geometrical proposition about this non-spectral, and now turned to be that is not only present, in the environment of animal, but also they use it just to make discrimination, to make something about, this is new. I think this open this color space configuration, that is geometrical, is some projection that you can play around, more tangible than before. Something. This would be my just reflection.
Maybe anybody else, Evan, perhaps, on the developments after the paper in the field?
Yeah. Thank you, Adrian. That was a wonderful talk. And just maybe before I say some things about the question, just to insert a little personal comment. Adrian and I met in 1986 in that more or less empty room in Jussieu when Francisco was setting up his lab then. So our work on color vision with Francisco goes back to that was the first summer actually that I was in Paris working with Francisco in both on the embodied mind and then also on color vision for my own dissertation. So it's very nice to hear those recollections. I would say that there's different ways that we can look at what's developed since that paper. There's the scientific side of things, which already includes a number of different scientific fields. And then there's also, of course, the philosophical side of things. On the scientific side, what we tried to do in that paper was to put together the neurobiology and neurophysiology with the psychophysics, with the computational vision, with an enactive approach to perception. And all of those things have just, developed tremendously in the past decades. So the work on animal color vision is much more explored. The work on visual ecology has developed. As Adrian was saying, the computational vision work has incorporated some of the insights coming from the study of visual ecology and active vision. There's been developments, like sensory motor contingency theories of perception, which are close to the enactive account. There's also a lot of development in the Gibsonian ecological psychology field. I would say that in some ways, the Gibsonian ecological psychology and the enactive approaches to perception have moved quite close together. We emphasize the differences back in those years, especially in the embodied mind. And in this paper, I would say they're much closer now. They've influenced each other. They've had a kind of ongoing dialogue, also mediated by things like sensory motor contingency theory. So those things are much more interactive and developed now than they were certainly when we were writing that paper. I would say that two things that you could say it might be too strong to say that we predicted in that paper, but that we certainly argued for in that paper, the idea of novel phenomenal hues and also of novel novel spectral colors, non-spectral colors. Those have all been borne out by the animal research, in particular by that study that Adrian showed us in the Hummingbird. So, you know, we argued for those things empirically and conceptually in that paper, and that's really been borne out by the new experimental work on animals. So that's quite a strong, I think, connective thread. And then lastly, in philosophy, at that time, we cited 2 or 3 principal works that had just appeared in the philosophy of color, by Larry Hardin and by David Hilbert and my former colleague at Toronto, Moen Matten, who wasn't at Toronto at that point. And since that period of those writers and then our contributions, there's been a huge development in the English-speaking philosophy literature on color. And most of it, not all of it, but most of it falls into the extremes that we identify in that paper. That is, most philosophers either try to fall back into some kind of objectivist position, or they fall back into some kind of subjectivist position. There are very few, there are a couple, but there are very few philosophers or cognitive scientists who try to develop a kind of relational, ecological, or enactive account. So that, I mean, to me, that speaks to what philosophers typically do, which is fall into extreme positions and, you know, try to shore up their, you know, antecedent commitments to these extremes. That's what philosophy has done throughout its history. So that doesn't particularly surprise me. But there has been some new work looking at, you know, relational accounts as well. So I'm encouraged by that. So that would be kind of a very like short summary, I suppose, of the state of things in philosophy, in English-speaking philosophy.
Marvelous. Thank you very much, Evan. Now, I would like to tie this with the other question, the question about the issues that normally pop up, emerge when we have these types of interdisciplinary discussions about color. There's this famous and almost proverbial dispute going back to Newton and Goethe about what do we actually mean when we talk about color. So how should we approach the study of color? Do we approach it at the level of phenomena, or do we try to study it by focusing on the underlying mechanisms, say the external stimuli and how these affect our neurophysiological apparatus? Of course, this is now a radical oversimplification, but again, when one reads, you know, some of the comments, some of the disputes, some of the critiques, one has this impression that this is still a very pertinent issue. So I would like to, you know, ask Adrian and then also other participants what they think about this, and then specifically hone in on this question about Goethe and his approach to color and how this might connect with what we've heard today about the ecological approach to color. So the interdisciplinary question, and what is it? What is color anyway, as Feyerabend might put it?
Yeah, it's a nice question, and I think I need to make a kind of disclaim on that, because I'm mostly experimentalist. I mean, I'm a physiologist, I'm a biologist. So and this was something that we couldn't really talk with Francisco at the time. I mean, that all of the, when we start this program, I mean, of the trying to track the uncolor space, I mean, using birds like subjects, you need to ask, you know, the question that you ask is very operational. I mean, you need to, in the sense that they're going to go to some dispositive, you know, you just to select something that you are presenting there, and that's it. I mean, this is what happened, and then you have the same methodology to when you go to the physiology, and I can illustrate all of the case when you are using single cell recording, or like we do now in the lab, that we are using 300, 4,000 electrodes, you know, that make it the talk and population of neuron, unfortunately, you don't have, I mean, the way to ask questions so general that what color is. I mean, what is the meaning of the color? Because I mean, I need to go out of my own field, and this is for me some problem in the term of that what I was trying to mention in the beginning with Francisco. We were not always be able to design an experiment that take care of both sides. You know, the only was like the link. The animal has potentially a lot of receptor, 3, 4, 5 for a receptor, and then maybe they use it. So we measure how they use it, but we have never tested in the field, you know, like this is what is nice in this paper that we just mentioned about the non-spectral one, because they use behavior in a very open, I mean, natural field. I mean, the animal goes there, they are not restrained. You know, the question is, did you see colors that humans don't see? And the answer is yes. Now, what is the experience, internal experience of these colors? I don't know. I mean, this is something. Evan sometimes say that this is a relation colors. I mean, you need to take everything in account. But how you put this in an experimental scientific question? This is what I feel that in my case, I don't have a lot of imagination on that, so it's difficult. Now, if you talk about your experience of color in terms of the aesthetics, or if you are a painter or an artist, or this is different because you feel, you can express, you can say something about, you can use your language to do that. You know, when we try to do this in with the experimental biology using other model than human is very difficult to do that. I think the question should be asked to people working in human using like fMRI or this non-invasive methodology, and ask them about this, I mean, neurophenomenology of the colors, you know. And this is the other program that Francisco started in the end of, I mean, when he moved to the Salpêtrière. I mean, this is more like, this can be afforded in that area. I mean, this is, I think it's going to be better. I don't know if someone is here about this time. I mean, because this is a new, I mean, axis or a new field that Francisco started when he moved to the Salpêtrière, you know, from Jussieu to the Salpêtrière.
Thank you very much for this answer, Adrian. And this is, you know, this is particularly interesting because not only do we have, say, the answer that the paper that you've written together with Evan and Francisco, and then responses to that paper, but also already in this particular team of 3 people, there were people, you know, all of you came from different backgrounds. So already when you were writing this paper, you had to engage in this type of dialogue, in this type of exchange. So it's not only, you know, when others post comments, but already during the process of writing the question, you kind of had to find a way to constructively and productively speak and talk about color, coming from these different areas and backgrounds. So I think this is a very, very important question. I mean, it's so I would maybe ask if anybody else has anything to say on this topic. So that these 2 different approaches to color, one that is very experiential and that emphasizes the texture that colors have, and that seem to get lost when you, at least to a certain degree, when you're studying them via neurophysiological methods, where they do seem to be just something that is in one way or another secondary. So any comments on that, any thoughts on that, how to go about approaching this? And then I would really like to maybe allow Matt and Natalie, who have posed questions about Goethe's approach to color and Merleau-Ponty's approach to color, and so on and so forth, to maybe add a little bit about those topics. Yes, Evan.
Well, just quickly, I think it's worth pointing out that among the antecedents to neurophenomenology is classical psychophysics in the form of people like Mach and Helmholtz and Hering, who worked actually with the concrete experience of color. And that was the touchstone and departure point from which then they proceeded to develop abstract models, psychophysical scales that are then used to investigate color physiologically and behaviorally. So already in the very early emergence of color science, we have you could call it a kind of proto neurophenomenology. And when Francisco thought about neurophenomenology, of course, he was aware of this, and he thought of those thinkers, those scientists, as antecedent figures. What I would say is that here we have a lesson that we need to learn. Well, I'll use Whitehead's term. The lesson is not to bifurcate nature. So, Whitehead reminds us that we bifurcate nature when we say, well, red as a hue is just a subjective apparent event, and the reality is the underlying, or we conceive of it as underlying, mathematical, physical phenomena. And of course, Whitehead's whole point is that no, hue or red is an event in nature, and we have to understand it as such. And we already abstract from it experientially in our own experience, in our color language, in the ways that we emphasize certain colors over others. And we carry on that project of abstraction when we do psychophysical scaling, and then when we investigate biologically. So the task is to redo the science without that bifurcation. And that, of course, is what neurophenomenology is also about, and what figures like Goethe are trying to articulate in their time in reaction to, say, the abstractive project of Newton. So it's just to say that I think already in the science of color, we have a very early example of all of the things that we're dealing with in neurophenomenology and in contemporary sciences of mind writ large.
Thank you for this, Evan. Matt, would you maybe say, either pose the question you wrote in the chat, or if you want to approach this from a different angle, but if you would like to bring Goethe and or Whitehead into the debate, who have already been mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I can add much to what has already been said, and to the helpful comments that Evan just made about the bifurcation of nature. I'm reminded of something that Goethe said, that just in terms of the relationship between theory, which in science is typically some abstract model meant to explain phenomena, and the phenomena themselves. And Goethe says that in and of itself, theory is only useful insofar as it makes us believe in the nexus of appearances. Theory is only useful insofar as it makes us believe in the nexus of appearances. And so, like Whitehead, moving towards a view of nature as not bifurcated, where red is an element in the process of nature rather than something, in Whitehead's term, something like a psychic addition that's projected onto the nature, then what science becomes is the study of the relationship among phenomena, rather than the search for something behind phenomena that would cause them. And so I guess a question that I would want to formulate in this context would be, to what extent the enactivist project, in the most general sense, is in alignment with this Goethean and Whiteheadian project, or if there is still some role for theory which would point to an underlying causal structure that even in principle will never be available phenomenologically, or if enactivism would say science needs to be reformulated such that a hypothesis is only a kind of stand-in, that maybe we can't experience that hidden dimension yet, but some future experience, maybe extended with instruments, would allow us to bring that into the realm of our experience. Does that make sense? Hopefully I framed the question well enough that it can be answered.
I think it was framed very nicely and cogently. I hope so, but I might be biased. As a philosopher, I might be biased here. So Adrian or Evan, whoever.
Yeah,
wants to
Evan, I
tackle
think is
this.
more close to this reflection about the only thing I have just before. I mean, I was thinking about what allow us to begin or to have, I mean, the possibility just to create colors. I mean, this is something that is energetically defined. I mean, why we have an so narrow band in the whole spectrum that allow you color vision. I mean, this is something that we are co-determinate in the sense that we just are, I mean, we are just move our sensory system, because I mean, you have the protein that we are building up. I mean, we build things using genetics, protein, and the interaction between energy, that is the energy of photons, that can arrive to your sensory system. For instance, the visual system is very narrow. You cannot go to the infrared, because then it's too heat. I mean, it's very warm. And the other, you have a lot of intensity, that is the ultraviolet. So we are just moving in this small window, and that's it. I mean, we are not seeing other electromagnetic. So I mean, this is a condition, and physical condition, and actually that should be taken account too. I mean, it's how our organism, the life was, I mean, was allowed in our world that only use this narrow band. I mean, it's something that intrigued me, but this is was the only solution that was there. I mean, it's very, I mean, it's a nice reflection, and I think Helmut, when he's doing, I mean, the point of view of the psychophysics, he talked a lot about this psychophysics, and also the point of view of the energy of the photon. I mean, all of these physical properties of light. But I haven't said nothing about the question, so because
No, that's a good point. That's a good spin on the whole question. I mean, that is a very good question, this narrow band, and why this particular narrow band. So it's far from trivial, for sure.
Yeah.
And it's dubious, whether you could even start talking about it intelligently from the strictly, say, phenomenological perspective that would not take into account, or again, it depends on how you construe the relationship between, say, phenomenological and scientific. Anyway, Evan, did you want to comment maybe on the Goethe? It seemed like that.
Yeah, so I mean, I in what Matt was saying, I heard maybe two questions. So one was specifically about Goethe and his way of thinking about theory and experience, specifically with regard to color, and how we might relate that to the discussion that's happening today. And then the second question, if I understood right, was a much, in a way, larger question about the relationship between science and experience, both, I suppose you could say, methodologically and metaphysically, and how that relates to the enactive approach. So if I parse the questions correctly, well, let me respond to the questions I just parsed, and hopefully I parsed them in the right way. And if not, Matt can refine or correct me. So I mean, the way that I read Goethe is as someone who, in his dissatisfaction with Newton's theory, insisted on what we might call the primacy of experience for our understanding of what color is. So this goes back to the question of, what is color? So it's Goethe insists on concrete visual experience and ways of, you could say, manipulating and exploring it within the phenomenological domain as our touchstone for understanding what color is. And he objects to certain abstractive procedures and conceptions that Newton employs. And so I see Goethe as insisting on, you could say, the primacy of lived experience methodologically and epistemologically. And I think that's very important. I think he has, I would say, somewhat idiosyncratic ideas about the phenomenology in relation to his, theoretical notions of archetypal phenomenon, or, phenomenon that he also has in his, botanical work. So it's not as if, he's doing some kind of pure unadulterated phenomenology. He has a conceptual system he's deploying in there as well. And I think that in relation to our thinking today, some of his ideas are very rich and some of them are harder to work with. So the archetypal phenomenon idea, I think, is harder to work with in the context of how we think about vision and visual experience today. That would be my own view anyway. Then with regard to the more general or the larger question, let me come at it this way. So I personally think I never use the term enactivism. One, because I try to avoid ism thinking, and two, because we always spoke of the enactive approach. So we thought of it as a work in progress, as a way of approaching things that could encompass many different theories, many different models, and different, philosophies. So I very much resist the idea that the enactive approach should be treated as a way of pursuing things that needs to come to some, settled theoretical perspective or position in metaphysics. That said, as a philosopher, my own inclination is to think that that when we're talking about science, so I think of it in a sort of combination of Whitehead and Husserl, maybe, that scientific laws are formal, idealized, abstract structures that are not concretely, physically real. And we shouldn't make the surreptitious substitution, to use Husserl's words, of thinking that the ideal and formal is concretely real in the way that, say, the lived experience of heat or the lived experience of color is. That's a kind of confusion. At the same time, I think with Whitehead that experience and the growth of science out of experience is already abstractive. And when we pursue it in rigorous ways, it allows us to open up new domains of experience and new observables, new ways of intervening to manipulate things. We enlarge our faculties of perception through technology and instrumentation. So I'm not, I'm not an anti-realist about things like electrons, for example, because we can use electrons to do things. We can manipulate electrons. So they're different from abstract mathematical laws in that sense. We can actually deploy them experientially in a way that allows us to see their effects. So I see us as engaged in constantly opening up the horizon of experience through science and through technology, but we have to be careful not to, fall into the fallacy of misplaced concreteness or the surreptitious substitution, where we substitute the mathematical map for the concrete territory of nature. And then if I think I saw in the chat, you said, well, for Whitehead, energy is experiential, the concrete reality of energy is experiential. I have some sympathy for that perspective, but I also think that there's a point at which that can become speculative in a way that I'm not as interested in for its own sake as a speculation. I'm interested in what a move like that will enable us to do in reconceptualizing what science is and how science works in ways that avoid things like, misplaced concreteness and the surreptitious substitution. So that would be at least an attempt at a partial answer to what I heard your question as.
Okay, thanks very much for this. Natalie had a somewhat similar question, and I would like to maybe do a little bit of an intro to that question because it relates to Merleau-Ponty, and then she can continue in the direction she would like to take this question. So it's interesting that Goethe, who was for the most part shunned by scientists, was actually a great source of inspiration for the German neurologist called Kurt Goldstein, who wrote a really nice book, which in English is called The Organism. And so Goldstein and some of the psychologists coming from the Gestalt psychology circle, namely Katz and Werner particularly, have developed interesting studies on how color, the name, so the notion of color, is a multidimensional concept, and that usually when scientists focus on color, they just study what they called colored areas or surface colors. But they also pointed out that there are such things as colors of transparent objects, colors of lighting. So they use terminology that is very strange nowadays because people don't use it. But what is interesting is that they observed how colors, even for example, when you have what you call color, change certain phenomenological aspects. So the quality of the color changes, so the hue changes, and also the certain surface characteristic changes. There remain certain constancies with regards to the bodily response. So how the organism as a whole responds to what Merleau-Ponty then calls the atmosphere of color. And I would like to read one quote from Merleau-Ponty, maybe, as a topic of discussion. I'll also put it in the chat, and then maybe Natalie can add something to this. He talks about when you have a fountain pen, which is black, and then you say put it into under a very bright light, but it's still black, although it has changed profoundly. It is basically illuminated. And this is the way he phrases it. And I find it very interesting. And I also think that this is the reason why, for instance, approaches such as Goethe, which seem to be antagonistic to the classical scientific approach, can be very useful if you think about them, deeply and try to integrate them into what you're doing as a scientist. Because again, Kurt Goldstein developed a whole notion or understanding of color by drawing on Goethe. So this is the quote. We shall not succeed in understanding perception unless we take into account a color function which may remain even when the qualitative appearance is modified. I say that my fountain pen is black and I see it as black under the sun's rays, but the blackness is less the sensible quality of blackness than a somber power which radiates from the object, even when it is overlaid with reflected light, and it is visible only in the sense in which moral blackness is visible. And I quote this intentionally. It's somewhat poetic, but I think it has a very strong evocative appeal, so that there is something to colors where you have these constancies that are not necessarily related to certain external factors. Of course, this is something that you emphasize in the ecological approach. But again, it brings us back to the question about what is color and this multidimensionality of color, both in the phenomenal realm and also in the physical realm. So Natalie, I don't know if you can somehow tie into this, and then maybe Adrian can say what he thinks about these questions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Sebastjan. Well, you said much more than what I had in mind first. So thank you for the quote, which is really very, very nice, and always difficult with Merleau-Ponty because as you said, is, well, a poetic man, and sometimes more suggestive than really very, well, it's very detailed, but you sometimes don't know exactly what it means in a sense. So that's the charm of the thing as well. So yeah, it's great. What I had in mind actually was, well, the very small sentence I wrote on the chat was about the fact that we are very usually discussing between the perceiver and the perceived, and even though the enactive approach wants to well, to bring about another level beyond subjectivism and objectivism, as Adrian showed it in the paper. Still, we have these two aspects, and we and it's what I found interesting in Merleau-Ponty's view, and it applies to colors, of course, is that he puts a kind of inverted perspective into play, because he would say that I don't perceive colored surfaces and colors, but the colors come to me. The color come to me, and the colored surface and comes to me or immerses me. So, and I think it's interesting to have in mind this kind of inversion. I don't know if it's possible in a scientific perspective to find the analogy. So I won't be able to go on this way. But what's interesting is that Merleau-Ponty actually was very, it was mentioned on the chat with some painters, but he was very much influenced by Paul Cézanne, namely. And he wrote a text called Le Doute de Cézanne. And especially in this influence, in Cézanne's influence, he was very much interested by the way Impressionists were painting, and how the color and the light was very much, they were not looking at the landscape, but the landscape was already coming to them. So, well, this inversion of perspectives, I think it's interesting to have it in mind in order to understand maybe also what he says when he says about when he talks about the vibration or the prismatic aspect of colors, not only as content, but as a broader way of being immersed, how the subject is immersed by the colors, and not the reverse, not only the reverse, let's say. So that's what I had in mind, actually. So I don't know if it helps or if it brings anything on in the discussion that.
It does, Natalie. Thank you. So, Adrian, any comments, thoughts on that?
Maybe I can try to comment, because I agree. I mean, this is a nice point of view about the perception in general about colors, and I think one of the facts that I think, if we can talk about fact, is that you never have colors, I mean, directly from the energy point of view of any stimuli. Say that you have photons, but your brain, they don't receive photon directly. I mean, it need to be transduced. I mean, there are no way to create any experience or naming of colors that you're gonna do this after. I mean, many networks that you're gonna be working together, and because you don't have access directly to this nomenclature that is color directly. I mean, from the energy point of view, I mean, you're gonna go. I mean, this is the jobs, you know, of sensor proteins, that they wanna catch the energy. Then you're gonna change the structure of this protein that's going to be more able just to let down, I mean, enter some ions, and then you're going to have liberation of some vesicle, and the vesicle is going to help to to go to one synapses, communication with another neuron, another one, and then you are in the brain, you know, with these mixing areas that start talking together just to put something that is called language, or I mean, so related to the colors. So I mean, this is something that is very important, because that's the plasticity, the richness of the neural network. I mean, is something that you are using to make sense of this stimuli. In that sense, nothing, I mean, that has been mentioned before by Natalie or Evan, I mean, surprised me in the term of each one tuning his own, I mean, I say training of his own brain and body in the world. I mean, they want to have his own experience, and that I just have showed this painter that is a woman that has an extra sensor. Then he has a completely different sensation experience with what we call colors. You know? I mean, it's something that is depending in your own visual system. Color, for example, you are monochromatic. You have one sensor that covers the whole wavelength, and you cannot compare with other one. You wanna look at everything like brightness, you know, between black and white, and that doesn't mean you don't want to have a nice experience of the world with very nice differentiation, which is gray, you know, steps, you know, it's going to be also wonderful, but it doesn't want to be similar that just put some color on that. No, that I think this is my, I mean, feeling that there's these levels that was mentioned in the wave of colonies. I mean, level of the analysis, the level of organization, levels of operation. Is something that when you try to track this problem of the color, you face on that, you face with that, you face where do you want to be looking at. And then it's like a checklist. I mean, you are gonna be this. I mean, this level is neuron, network, brain, behavior, and it's sometimes very difficult to make the link. You know, to associate the dependency of a level that is very molecular to one that is more neural network, to the then behavior, and then to the experience of all of this together. I mean, this is something that for me is an open question today.
Adrian, by the way, I forgot to mention that the question about Goldstein was also partly posed by Eva, so it's deemed fitting to mention or explicate this. So I tried to combine several questions together, but I would like to maybe ask you, you know, this idea of actually being somehow drawn in by the color, or the color taking over you in a certain sense. And this was also something that was mentioned by Gestalt psychologists and Goldstein, where you have levels of color which basically are not so much related to you perceiving a certain quality, but evoking in you a certain bodily attitude. Would you say that this is related to the notion of codetermination, which lies at the very center of the experiential and ecological approach that you're trying to develop? And if so, I would like to ask you whether you could maybe try to spell out a bit more this idea, so to flesh it out, the notion of codetermination. And in particular, I would like to actually pose a question that I found in one of the comments. It was made by Brooks. I don't know whether that is the correct pronunciation. It's on page 31. And the question that he poses is, what is the nature of this codetermination? Is this a causal process or a constitutive process? Because this is a very, very important question. Again, maybe a bit more interesting to a philosopher, but still, I think it's an important one. So this idea that, you know, the color evokes in me a specific behavioral attitude, which then in turn enables me to open up to certain other dimensions of space, among other things, certain bodily. It seems to be closely connected with the codetermination. So maybe some thoughts on that, and if you could maybe elaborate a little bit on codetermination and what type of a relationship basically are we talking about here?
Yeah, I think one of the thoughts that I can have in that in terms of this codetermination is when you start to talking about this, we are facing in animal that has been living in the earth, in this world for thousands, a couple of million of years, and then they have started to develop in some coupling with this world, because they need to survive in this one. This is more like something that is, there are some examples from that. In the sense that, what about the evolution of color signals in flowers and insect pollination, and also pollination? You can extend this to primates, because they take some fruits, they need to take this to pollinize, to make the pollination. So in that sense, maybe this codetermination is much easier to try to explain. You have more argument on that, because you can just use some data. The other one is codetermination in terms of what is the experience of the color in yourself, and then to come back to look at in a new way in the world, that you are facing on. This is more related to the human experience, in that sense that you can have this, use that in terms of the painting artists is what they do. They experience color and they use color permanently in terms of looking more, going out. So you are an impressionist, expressionist, or shaping the world in another way, using more tools, looking new, eventually new, mixing colors, just to create and different experience of that, because you are working on that. You are feeling colors, but you are working maybe in color, and you have the time and the resources just to dedicate to this area of arts. And I think this is a subject in itself. And I think, yes, using your language, your own intuition, sensitivity, all of these aspects, make you and that has a human, is something that is very normal that this happen. I don't see any equivalent of this in the non-primate. That's, you really use color like a dimension that actually can create. It's very difficult to study that. So this is, I think, is a gap there, a very strong gap in the area of biology, in experiment to just to create, to make the bond, to link between these two aspects. But yes, for me, it's make all of the sense what Natalie and you mentioned about the if color can you be using just for your own progress, your own development, your own growth, like human. Yeah, it's something that you can use like a concept every time, all of the time. People that paint, I have some experience with people that use color just to create things. They talk all the time about color, the use of color, the different tones of color. And I say the example of this person that I mentioned that has an tuning, an extra photoreceptor, that is enough, to create a new concept of art, how they paint, because she paints using, colors in that sense. You are substrate just to paint things that you are not seeing yourself. So this make a nice discussion about what she is saying. She is experienced the people that see the same painting. They say, okay, here is something that I don't understand, but this corresponds to the experience of this painter. So this is, I think, is something that can help to the discussion of about this color like an vector of growing yourself, you know, and using this for this codetermination. But I think it's more like I don't know its nature in that sense. In the case of human, can be taken like for a codetermination. We live, you know, in cities, you know, in cities. I mean, that are not the nature like we think when we are talking about codetermination. You know, nature, environment, ecological, everything that does make little sense for human in this moment of his history. You know, I mean, we are like in another world in this moment. Like animals, you know, like we are not interacting in that way. We are more, I mean, cognitive drive. I mean, we are thinking about I mean, outside of the nature. Most of people, I don't say that they are not people that live in nature directly, but I think it's very difficult to, I mean, to talk about this area for directly in human.
Yes, thank you very much. Any thoughts on that? Any comments on this? Codetermination. I saw that some people were writing in the chat. That's why I'm asking.
Yeah, maybe just to say what I said in the chat, that maybe co-creation would be a more dynamic word as co-determination, which is a limiting expression. Well, maybe it's the two sides of the same process, but one more active and also receptive, and the other one more static. I don't know.
One thing that ties into this, I think, and it's very important, is the question that I've posed about the what type of a relationship we have here, whether it is a causal relationship or internal relationship of force, so of a co-constitutive relationship. So this might seem like a unimportant thing or some, you know, philosophical technicality, but it's not actually. It has very profound and strong implications, because if there's only causal interrelation, you still are dealing with two separate entities of sorts that are somehow discrete, that are separate from one another, organism and its environment, however the environment is constituted, and then they causally interact. So there is no internal connection between the two. But there is also a stronger way of reading this. And this is the way of reading that Whitehead would adhere to, that I think that Francisco in would agree with. And you also find similar ideas in Merleau-Ponty when he talks about mutual implication. And that is that the organism and its world are internally interrelated in the sense of mutually co-constituting one. So they're constituting one another. So they are in a certain sense a part of a broader whole that somehow contains them, not contains, that's not the proper, but that, and they would be two aspects of this broader whole. And one way of picturing it is the image I constantly mention, and people who have heard my talks probably hate by now, is the figure against the background in Gestalt psychology, where you basically, if you want to have a figure, you have to have a background. And it's not like, you know, you can just forget about the background. No, you have to have it. So they are mutually implicatory. So in order for you to have one, you need the other. And the relationship between those two is internal in the sense of the meaning of figure is codetermined by the background and vice versa. And the point that, for example, Merleau-Ponty was making, and I think that Francisco was also trying to make in different ways, is that there is this type of relationship. And this has really profound impact on, first of all, how you go about construing science. And I also think that if more scientists knew about this more radical reading, I would venture to guess that they would be more nervous and hesitant to engage in these types of interdisciplinary collaborations, to be quite honest. I think that for the most part, when they hear codetermination, they just think, yeah, okay, well, so you have the world out there, you have the organism here somehow, and then they interact circularly, so in a circular fashion. What you do is you just kind of add a little bit of intrigue to the whole story. But if you really try to spell out the implications of this, it really changes the way you see reality as such. So yeah, any comments or thoughts on that? Yeah,
maybe
okay, Natalie, and then Adrian and others.
I think you could really reformulate it also in very simple Husserlian words, and having on one side what Husserl would call correlation, which means that you are well, you have two aspects and you try to figure out how to bring about a unity. And Husserl himself talks about co-constitution. And in that respect, you already have something far more, not a previous unity, but something that that will, in the same way as Francisco, as I said the last time, talks about the fold as something that's really at the same time two sides, and the two sides are working together and they don't exist one without the other. So they have this line which is uniting them, but which doesn't pre-exist, but it emerges at the same time as the two sides appear. So you have this kind of dynamic unity. And I think that when Husserl talks about co-constitution, he means exactly that in a sense. So it's far more integrative in a sense. And well, it goes in the same way as what you were saying, but I think Francisco was exactly there. And I just quoted this article in Alter when he speaks of generative passages. So he goes even further, not speaking only of constraints, generative constraints, but generative passages, which means that there is this dynamic going and going ever and ever. And,
okay, yes, very good. Thank you very much, Natalie. These are very illuminating comments and extensions. Adrian?
Yes, just a comment on that maybe this open a new, area of discussion, but in that sense that maybe there's different timing scaling. But one is the millions of years where you can see this co-evolution, co-determination in terms of flower selection, insect or bird that change some genomes. You need to change your genome, you need to make mutation just to start to be calling we are co-adapting. But this is one issue. But if you just take, I had not the time to put more in that in the presentation for the time, but if you take other aspects like how your nervous system, brain, essentially is changing in your life with aging, with any pathological affection, or taking just aging. Aging is something that is a slow process where everything is changing all the time. So you're gonna end up with a brain that has other cells, has less plasticity. So your experience of anything that is called color vision is gonna be different, in the sense that you're gonna be affecting color experience with memory. Maybe you're gonna lose a little bit memory, you're gonna lose some plasticity in your neural network, you're gonna be losing things. But this is something that is also in your lifetime. That in that sense, codetermination is gonna be maybe looking at inside yourself. In that time, how your brain, your capacity, to generate this relation with the world is changing, but maybe it's going to be more in your side, because biology is taking, it's going to be, each day is going to be aged, the aging is going to be taking place in your brain, and then you're going to die sometime after that. So you are losing capacity, you are having other things, but you are losing the capacity eventually that you was having when you were born, in the beginning. So maybe this is something to be studied during the ontogeny of the human being, how you are being really, co-determinate with your world, but following you up yourself, describing your own experience, how I feel, why I don't remember names, what this color seems very different to what I remember. This kind. This is what I'm saying, because the way of coloring, the example that they put was in a million-year scale. This is evolutionary time. So this co-determination is not maybe the same that we are talking now. Is very different, and also food, epigenetics, all of this change your brain every day. Your biome, also determine how you are in sense of, all of these internal, vector can also are shaping your self-payment, your immune system. So maybe this is something that's what I say. This opened for me a new area of discussion, because it's very interesting. But I would separate, this co-determination in the sense of the way of coloring that was very concrete in terms of the insect pollination, color of flowers. This is one of the examples of maybe the discussion that is more like we are having now.
Yes, thank you, Adrian. That's a very good point. I started this Q&A section by saying that color is one of those fundamental phenomena that tends to be overlooked, but it also draws many of the people who see that there's something wrong with certain prevailing conceptions or approaches within science and maybe certain other epistemic disciplines. And definitely time is another such phenomenon. It's also easy to just think, say that we already know what time is, but the truth is that there are so many different dimensions and layers to the phenomenon of time that it also constantly pops up in discussions that normally revolve around issues with prevailing paradigms. And this notion and question of temporality, of taking a processual approach instead of having a static approach. So this dynamic way of thinking or seeing things is very interesting indeed. Unfortunately, we're slowly moving towards the end of today's session. So maybe if anybody has a last comment or a quick question, I would prefer a comment if I'm being honest at this point. Yes, Evan.
Well, maybe just a comment on the constitutive causal question that you raised, because I think it's interesting. I think it would be helpful to go back to Francisco's star perspective from not one, not two, and think about that very distinction in terms of the star perspective, because the distinction between causal and constitutive is actually context dependent and relative to a frame of investigation and shouldn't be set up oppositionally. So if you remember the network that Francisco uses in Not One, Not Two to illustrate the star, you can think of the branching tree structure as a temporally ordered causal process where A affects B and B affects C and C affects D. So there you're looking at the network in terms of causal processes that you're mapping out in time. But when you think of them all as interfolded and entangled in a complex network, then they're constitutive of the network and they form a unity. And so what we're doing when we talk about cause and constitution is we're emphasizing different analytic perspectives on phenomena that form entangled wholes, and that we cut, to use Francisco's language, in various ways. And in the concrete case of color, you could say, well, over the vast time scale of evolutionary history, you have flower pigmentations forming that causally affect through light reflections the selective, histories of, reproducing insects and organisms, so that you have this, temporal causal back and forth. That's to look at it from a causal perspective over evolutionary time. But of course, if you then look at the organism and environment as coupled systems with constant reciprocal causation, you treat them as a whole ecological unity, and then you're looking at it constitutively. So it's a question of what question we ask and how we want to look at, really ultimately, at time in a way. And there, I think, we should remind ourselves of the star perspective and not oppose the causal and the constitutive.
Yes, Evan, thanks. That's a very good point. I think that one of the things that seem to be lacking, however, is precisely this network image, network picture. This was usually somehow downgraded in contemporary approaches, although one could argue that these types of approaches are now having some sort of a renaissance or revival as well. And we talked about Whitehead last time, and he seems to be a really, really good example of doing something like that, trying to conceive of these, so the most fundamental questions, philosophical questions that pertain also to what science is doing from this very dynamically network perspective. That's one thing. So basically working on these perspectives, developing them, discussing them, and then also convincing scientists that, there's this interrelation between the network and the more linear way of approaching things, and presenting these two approaches in a way. Star cybernetics would be one way of doing it. That would make sense to them, and that would convince them that you're not basically in any way degrading or shunning or whatever the scientific approach. In fact, that you're actually extending and improving it in significant ways. Anyway, at this point, I would suggest that we close for today. Thank you all for joining. Adrian, thank you so much for a nice presentation, for very interesting responses and comments. And thanks to everybody else who either contributed in the discussion actively, or just served as a constitutive background to the figure that was unfolding. And as we said, they are mutually implicatory, so we can't say that one is more important than the other. So thanks to everyone. Be well. Bye-bye.